She just wanted a quiet meal with her father, but within minutes, the entire diner went still. 3 men in biker jackets closed in loud, arrogant, and dangerous. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't raise her voice. But she made one phone call. And what happened next didn't just shock the bikers, it changed the entire town. They thought they were cornering the daughter of a blind man. What they didn't know was who raised her. In that one call, it turned the tables in a way no one saw coming. She walked into that diner like she'd done 100 times before. But this time, the air felt different. The sun was beginning to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Her boots crunched against the gravel as she made her way toward the glass door. Inside, everything looked normal: checkered floor, polished stools, the smell of fries and fresh coffee, but she could feel eyes on her. Not the usual kind, not curiosity, not kindness. It was colder, calculated, watching. She wore her father's dog tags around her neck, not for show, for strength. Because every time she heard them clink together, she remembered the man who taught her how to stand tall even when the world tried to knock her down, her father, Staff Sergeant William Hawk Ramsey. A man who lost his sight in the line of duty, but never once lost his vision for what was right. And now, he sat in a booth by the window, tracing the rim of his coffee cup with steady hands. He didn't see what she saw. But she did. 3 men in leather jackets by the jukebox, one of them pretending not to stare, another whispering, and the third grinning. They weren't here for the coffee. She sat across from her father, smiled, and greeted him like nothing was wrong. But her posture was tight, her hands unmoving. Something was coming, and she knew it, because evil doesn't always come shouting. Sometimes it waits, sometimes it circles. The waitress walked over, and even she seemed uneasy. Her voice trembled as she asked what they wanted. Just the usual, she said, nodding. Then a chair scraped. One of the bikers got up, walked over slowly, heavy boots hitting tile like drumbeats. He stopped just behind her. Too close. Didn't think this place allowed dogs, he muttered, eyeing her father's service dog curled quietly under the table. Her father tilted his head slightly. He couldn't see him, but he could hear. And more than that, he could feel disrespect in the air like smoke. She didn't flinch, but her voice, calm, careful, she said, "That dog's trained to defend." The biker scoffed, leaned on the table. "That right? Trained to bite, huh?" "No," she said, locking eyes with him. "Trained to judge threats, and right now, he's watching you." Under the table, the shepherd's ears perked, silent, alert. People in the diner started noticing. Heads turned, forks paused midair, but the biker didn't back off. Instead, he smirked. "Looks like you got a lot to say, sweetheart. Maybe you and I should take this outside." Her father turned his head toward the voice. Back off, but the man didn't. He was enjoying the attention now. He tapped the table. "Old man, you should teach your daughter some manners." That's when the second biker stood up, and the third. Now it wasn't just intimidation. It was surrounding. The tension cut through the diner like a blade. She looked at her father, calm, steady, just like always, but she knew this was more than a scare tactic. They weren't looking for a fight. They were looking to dominate, to humiliate, and she had seen enough. She reached slowly into her jacket, not for a weapon, for her phone, and she made one call, just one. 3 rings, then a voice on the other end. "Go for Echo 6. She didn't need to explain. All she said was, "I need eyes at the Blue Ridge Diner. Code Iron Eagle." The voice went silent, then answered, "On the way." She hung up. The biker in front of her raised an eyebrow. "What, calling your boyfriend?" She smiled. "No. I called someone who trained with ghosts. You've got about 3 minutes. He laughed, but it wasn't genuine, because something in her voice didn't shake. And the people in the diner, they started whispering. Someone even got up and left, quietly slipping outside. One of the bikers glanced toward the window. Then, the low rumble of engines, not 1, not 2, 5, 10, more. Headlights pierced the dusk. Black SUV, a matte gray bike with military decals, boots hitting the ground in synchronized rhythm, and leading them, a woman in a leather vest with silver stripes. No smile, no questions, just presence. They walked in like a silent wave, not a word spoken. The bikers who had stood so tall just seconds ago, now shrinking because what they didn't know was that the girl they tried to corner was raised by a man who led elite ops through enemy territory. Blind, a man whose daughter was trained by some of the best in the country and who still had connections most people would never know existed. One of the newcomers stepped forward, tall, built like a wall, tattoos down both arms. He looked at the main biker and said, "You made a mistake. Now you fix it." The biker mumbled, "We didn't mean nothing." But the man interrupted. Too late, he motioned toward the door. The bikers didn't argue. They walked out, quick, heads low. The diner was silent again. She sat down across from her father. He reached forward, placed a hand on hers. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I didn't call for help, Dad. I called family." And in that moment, no one in that room would ever forget who she was, not because she fought back, but because she didn't have to. She made one call, and it turned the tables. The diner slowly came back to life, but the air still held the weight of what had just happened. People whispered. Waitresses looked shaken. Customers glanced at her and her father. Not with pity, but with something different, respect. She looked at the man across from her, her father, his eyes, empty of sight but full of understanding. "You didn't panic," he said quietly. "I learned from you," she replied. He smiled faintly. "Good, because they're not gone for good." She tilted her head. "What do you mean? They weren't just bikers. Did you hear their boots, their steps, military, maybe ex, maybe disgraced, but not amateurs?" She looked out the window. The SUV were still parked. The team hadn't left, and she knew her father was right. This wasn't random. This was planned. 15 minutes later, the woman in the silver, striped vest stepped inside. She walked to their table, nodded at the veteran. "Sir," he reached out, shook her hand without hesitation. "Thank you for coming. We were already nearby," she said, tracking a pattern. "This group's been hitting small towns, soft targets, testing limits." She looked at his daughter. They didn't know whose table they walked up to. The father asked, "Are they connected?" She nodded. "Looks like it. 2 weeks ago, a Gold Star widow in Georgia got harassed in a parking lot. Before that, a disabled vet's son was followed home after school. They're targeting military families, but not just any. The strong ones, the visible ones." Her voice lowered. "They want a message sent back, retaliation, fear. They're building something." The daughter's hands clenched. This wasn't just a diner standoff. It was the beginning of something darker. Back in the parking lot, the air was thick with tension again. The team stayed in formation, eyes scanning. But inside the girl's mind, plans were forming. She knew what fear felt like. She'd felt it the day they told her that her father would never see her face again. She felt it the day she watched him walk into walls, trip, fall, curse at the world. But then she watched him rise, watched him learn to live again, watched him fight to protect the very people who left him behind. That's when she made a vow. If they came for her family again, if they came for another military kid like her, she wouldn't just stand. She'd build a wall they couldn't climb, and she'd do it without making a sound. That night, she sat in the back of the diner alone, a laptop open, security footage replaying, license plates, faces, patterns. Her hands moved fast, controlled, precise. This wasn't her first time handling intelligence. Because what the bikers didn't know was that she had followed her father's footsteps in her own way. She never wore a uniform, but she had sat behind screens in dark rooms, analyzing, pinpointing, coordinating extractions for teams who never even knew her name. She had walked away from that life after her father's injury, but now the mission had come to her doorstep and she was done walking away. The next morning, news broke. A warehouse raid in Tennessee, illegal weapons, false identities, satellite jammers, and among those arrested, 2 of the same men from the diner, the third still missing. But not for long, because her one phone call had done more than summon backup. It had reactivated a network, people loyal not to politics, not to glory, but to the ones who served, to the families who paid the price without ever signing a contract, to the kids who grew up in silence while the world waved flags only on holidays. A few days later, She and her father sat again at the same booth, same coffee, same quiet, but this time, no shadows. Just a waitress who smiled and said, "It's on the house, Sergeant." He nodded, touched his chest where the dog tags rested. "I never expected applause," he said. "I just hoped my daughter would live in peace." She smiled. "And if they try again?" he asked. She looked out the window. "Then we remind them," she said, "that this family doesn't break. We multiply." Later that evening, a letter arrived, no stamp, no address. Just left on the windshield of her truck. Inside, a single line handwritten in bold, jagged strokes. "This isn't over." She read it, then burned it, because she didn't need warnings. She needed mission clarity. And now she had it. In the weeks that followed, whispers began spreading through biker bars and underground meetings. They said something had changed, that someone had turned the tables, that a blind soldier's daughter made one call and unleashed a quiet storm, one that didn't make noise, but left echoes wherever it went. The message was clear: you can try to corner the weak, you can try to intimidate the quiet, but if you touch a veteran's family, you don't just face one person, you face everyone they've ever trained, everyone they've ever inspired, everyone they've ever protected. And as for the girl in the diner, she still shows up, same time every Thursday. She sits with her father. They talk about memories, music, and his favorite old movies. She never looks over her shoulder. She doesn't have to, because the whole town does it for her now. The cook, the waitress, the mechanic across the street, even the sheriff parks closer on Thursdays. She made one call, and it changed everything, not because she called for violence, but because she reminded them all real strength doesn't roar. It rises quietly, and it never stands alone. The town thought it was over, that the one call, the arrest, the silence, meant peace, but storms don't always end with thunder. Sometimes they hide behind calm winds. Until the next strike, and it came, on a Thursday just like before. She and her father were halfway through their meal. He was telling a story, how during deployment he once navigated a dark cave using only the sound of dripping water. She laughed. "You were a human radar, Dad." Then the bell above the diner door jingled. Everyone turned, but this wasn't like last time. No boots, no leather, just a man, clean, shaven, quiet, wearing a dark gray cap pulled low. He walked slowly to the counter, didn't order anything, just stood, and when he looked up she saw it, the third biker, the one who vanished. She stood up, calm. He smiled at her, like they were old friends meeting for coffee. But she knew better. This wasn't a visit, it was a message. He turned toward her father, who was still seated, unaware of the sudden shift in the room, and he said 4 words. "Your call missed one." She didn't move, didn't breathe. Every eye in the diner was on them now. She took a slow step forward and replied, "That call wasn't for you." He tilted his head. "No," he asked. She reached into her jacket. Not for a phone, but for the necklace under her shirt. Dog tags, her father's, hers, 2 sets, 1 legacy. She held them in her palm. This wasn't just about one phone call, she said. It was about every name on every wall, every flag folded, every silent night wondering if someone was coming home. Her voice didn't rise, but it carried. All you see is weakness, but what you walked into is memory, is sacrifice, is blood you'll never understand. The biker smiled again, then his hand moved, but before anyone else could react, a hand gripped his wrist. Her father, blind but not broken, he stood up, slowly, tall, solid, and said, "I may not see your face, but I'll never forget your scent." The man froze. The sheriff stepped in. Handcuffs clicked. It was over. Back at their booth, she looked at her father. "You felt him before I did." He nodded. "Because cowards carry the same chill. You just learn to recognize the cold." And from that day forward, the story of the blind veteran's daughter traveled beyond the town, beyond the state. It became a symbol of strength, of legacy, of how one quiet call could turn fear into fire, and a diner into a battlefield where courage quietly won.